October 14th, 1941. Outskirts of Kalinin, Soviet Union. Temperature dropping toward freezing. The Panzer II rattled across the frozen mud like a tin can filled with rocks. Inside, Oberfeldwebel Ernst Müller gripped the gunner's controls and watched the landscape through his narrow viewport. Birch trees, abandoned farms, smoke columns rising from the town ahead. The engine screamed at 2,800 RPM, high-pitched and fragile, compared to the diesel roar of the Panzer III's rolling 50 meters to his left. Müller had commanded this machine for 7 months. He knew every weakness. The armor was 30 millimeters at its thickest point. The main gun was a 2-centimeter autocannon designed for reconnaissance, not frontline combat. The crew compartment was so cramped that his knees touched the loader's back. When they crossed the Bug River in June, soldiers from the heavy panzer companies had called it Das Spielzeug, the toy. They weren't entirely wrong. The Panzer II weighed 9.5 tons. A T-34 weighed 26. When Soviet tanks appeared on the horizon, doctrine required the light panzers to fall back and let the bigger guns handle the work. Müller had followed that doctrine 11 times since the invasion began. 11 times he had reversed his tracks and watched other crews burn while he retreated to safety. He told himself it was tactical sense. His loader, Gefreiter Klaus Hoffmann, believed it too. His driver, Schütze Otto Becker, never questioned the orders. But Müller knew what the infantry thought. He had seen it in their eyes at the river crossings, at the supply depots, at the field hospitals where they smoked and joked while his crew refueled. The light panzers ran. The real soldiers stayed. The radio crackled. "All units, this is Adler. Enemy armor spotted. Grid 472. T-34s. Count 3. Panzer IIIs engage. Reconnaissance elements hold position and provide flank security." Müller's hands tightened on the controls. Hold position. That meant stay back. Watch. Survive. Becker slowed the tank to a crawl. Hoffmann loaded a magazine into the autocannon. 20 rounds of armor-piercing. Useless against frontal plates, but regulation nonetheless. Through the viewport, Müller watched the Panzer IIIs advance in formation, their long-barreled 75mm guns traversing left and right. The T-34s emerged from a tree line 800 meters out. Squat, angular, their sloped armor catching the pale sunlight. One of them fired. The sound arrived a half-second after the flash, a deep crack that made the air tremble. The round hit nothing, ploughing into the dirt 40 meters short of the lead Panzer III. The German tanks returned fire. Smoke, noise, the mathematics of destruction playing out in real time. One T-34 took a hit to the turret and stopped moving. Another reversed behind a barn. The third accelerated forward, closing the distance, its gun swinging toward the rightmost Panzer III. Müller watched. That was his job. Watch and report. The T-34 fired again. This time the round struck true. The Panzer III lurched sideways, smoke pouring from its engine deck. Müller saw the hatch open. 2 crewmen stumbled out, their uniforms smoking. One collapsed. The other crawled toward a ditch. "Sir," Hoffmann said quietly, "we could—" "Hold position," Müller interrupted. The remaining Panzer IIIs repositioned, flanking the T-34, hitting it twice in rapid succession. The Soviet tank shuddered to a halt, one track blown apart. The crew bailed out and ran for the woods. The German gunners did not pursue them with machine gun fire. There was no time. The second T-34 reappeared from behind the barn, its gun already firing. Another Panzer III took a hit. Another crew scrambling for safety. Müller's throat felt dry. His tank was untouched. Clean, safe, irrelevant. The engagement lasted 4 more minutes. By the end, 2 T-34s were destroyed, and 1 had retreated. 3 Panzer IIIs were immobilized or burning. The infantry moved forward to secure the farm. Müller received orders to advance and take up a screening position on the left flank. As they rolled past the burning wrecks, Hoffmann leaned close. "We have to do something," he said. "We can't just keep running." Müller said nothing, but he thought about it. He thought about it all night. Müller had been a machinist before the war. He had worked in a tool and die shop in Essen, fabricating precision parts for industrial presses. He understood tolerances, metallurgy, the way force distributed through structures. When he looked at the Panzer II, he did not see a toy. He saw a machine designed for a purpose it could no longer fulfill. The 2-centimeter KWK-30 autocannon could fire up to 280 rounds per minute in ideal conditions. In practice, the sustained rate was closer to 120 due to barrel heat and magazine changes. The rounds themselves weighed 140 grams and left the barrel at 830 meters per second. Against soft targets, infantry and light vehicles, the weapon was devastating. Against the sloped 45mm armor of a T-34, it was a nuisance. But Müller had noticed something during the months of retreat and advance. The T-34 had weak points. Every tank did. The turret ring, the driver's vision port, the engine deck. The problem was hitting those points under combat conditions. At range, the autocannon lacked the precision. At close range, the Panzer II lacked the armor to survive long enough to aim, unless the crew changed the rules. 3 days after the engagement at Kalinin, the division paused for resupply near a captured rail depot. Müller used the downtime to inspect the maintenance records of every Panzer II in the battalion. He found a pattern. 5 tanks had been lost to mechanical failure. 3 had been destroyed by direct fire. 7 had been abandoned due to fuel shortages. Not a single one had been lost in close-quarters combat with enemy armor, because they never got that close. Müller presented his findings to Hauptmann Vogel, the battalion's second-in-command. Vogel was a career officer, 42 years old, with a scar across his left cheek from the Polish campaign. He listened without interrupting. When Müller finished, Vogel lit a cigarette and stared at the map on the table between them. "You want to use the light panzers as assault guns," Vogel said. "I want to use them as they were designed," Müller replied. "Close support, rapid movement, exploitation. Against T-34s, against their weak points," Vogel exhaled smoke. "The autocannon can't penetrate frontal armor. It doesn't have to. At 50 meters, I can target the turret ring, the rear deck, the tracks. The Panzer II is faster than any Soviet tank, 13 kilometers per hour in reverse. If we can get close, hit the vulnerable spots, and withdraw before they can rotate, we disrupt their formations. We make them hesitate. You make them angry," Vogel said, "and then they crush you." "Maybe," Müller admitted. "But right now we're just watching. We're passengers." Vogel stubbed out his cigarette. "The doctrine exists for a reason, Oberfeldwebel. Light tanks cannot brawl with heavies. That's not cowardice. It's mathematics." "Then change the mathematics." Vogel studied him for a long moment. "You have a crew that will follow you into this." "Yes, sir." "Then you have permission to test your theory. Once. If it works, we'll discuss expansion. If it fails—" "I understand, sir." Vogel nodded. Dismissed. Müller left the command tent and walked back to his tank. Hoffmann and Becker were sitting on the hull, sharing a tin of condensed milk. They looked up as he approached. "We're going hunting," Müller said. Müller named the tactic Vesper, the Wasp. It required 3 elements: speed, precision, and absolute faith in the crew. The first modification was psychological. Müller spent 2 days drilling his crew on emergency procedures. Becker practiced reversing at full throttle while maintaining a straight line. Hoffmann timed his reload speeds until he could swap magazines in under 8 seconds. Müller recalibrated the gun sight to account for the closer engagement distances. They ran through simulations in an empty field, using wooden stakes to represent enemy tanks. Approach from the flank. Fire 5 rounds. Reverse. Repeat. The second modification was tactical. Müller studied Soviet tank movements from battalion intelligence reports. T-34s typically advanced in groups of 3 to 5, with the command tank slightly ahead. They relied on speed and armor to overwhelm German positions, often bypassing dug-in infantry to target panzers directly. This created gaps in their formation. Müller intended to exploit those gaps. The third modification was mechanical. Müller requested and received permission to remove the 5mm side skirts from his Panzer II. The skirts provided negligible protection against anti-tank rounds, but added weight and reduced mobility. Without them, the tank's power-to-weight ratio improved by 7%. Becker reported that the steering felt sharper, the acceleration quicker. On October 21st, the opportunity arrived. A Soviet counterattack developed near the village of Torzhok, 40 kilometers northeast of Kalinin. Intelligence reported at least a dozen T-34s, supported by infantry and anti-tank guns. The German line bent but held. Panzer IIIs engaged from fixed positions, while infantry called in artillery. Müller's Panzer II was assigned to a reconnaissance screen on the southern edge of the engagement area. He ignored the assignment. Instead, Müller positioned his tank behind a collapsed stone wall 300 meters from the main road. From there, he could observe the Soviet advance without exposing his silhouette. Hoffmann loaded the autocannon. Becker kept the engine idling at 1500 RPM, ready to move instantly. Müller watched through the gun sight, counting the T-34s as they rolled past. 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth tank lagged behind, its left track throwing mud in uneven clumps. A mechanical issue, Müller guessed. Maybe a worn tensioner. The crew would be distracted, focused inward rather than outward. Perfect. Becker, Müller said quietly, 30 meters forward. Stop behind the birch cluster. The Panzer II lurched into motion, engine whining. The distance closed in seconds. Müller aligned the gun sight on the T-34's rear deck, where the engine compartment met the turret. The armor there was 20 millimeters thick, angled at 15 degrees. Within the autocannon's penetration envelope. Fire, Müller said. The gun roared. 20 rounds in 3 seconds. Tracer rounds arced across the gap, sparking against the T-34's hull. Most ricocheted. 3 punched through. The Soviet tank lurched forward, black smoke pouring from the engine deck. The turret began to rotate, slowly, grinding through the damaged mechanism. Reverse, Müller ordered. Becker slammed the transmission into reverse. The Panzer II shot backward, disappearing behind the stone wall before the T-34 could complete its rotation. Müller counted to 10. Then he ordered Becker forward again, this time 20 meters to the left. The T-34 was stopped now, smoke thickening. The hatch opened. Müller fired another burst, not at the crew, but at the turret ring. The rounds punched through the thin armor, jamming the rotation mechanism completely. The Soviet tank was immobilized. Reverse, Müller said again. They withdrew to the original position. The entire engagement had lasted 40 seconds. The T-34 sat burning in the road. The other Soviet tanks continued forward, unaware that one of their own had been crippled. Hoffmann was breathing hard. Did we just reload? Müller interrupted. We're not done. Word spread fast. By the evening of October 22nd, every crew in the Light Panzer Battalion had heard about Müller's engagement. Some dismissed it as luck, others called it reckless. Hauptmann Vogel called it effective. He authorized the expansion of the Wespe tactic to 3 additional Panzer IIs. Müller conducted a briefing in a muddy field, using a captured T-34 turret as a visual aid. He explained the weak points, the timing, the necessity of reversing before the enemy could react. The other commanders listened without interrupting. 2 of them volunteered immediately. The third hesitated, but eventually agreed. On October 24th, the battalion received orders to support an infantry assault on a fortified Soviet position near the Volga River. Intelligence reported heavy armor presence, at least 8 T-34s and several KV-1 heavy tanks. The Panzer IIIs would engage from range. The Panzer IIs would scout and harass. Müller proposed an alternative. Let the Panzer IIs engage first, from close range, targeting the command tanks, force the Soviets to react defensively, create chaos. The Panzer IIIs could then exploit the confusion with precision fire. Vogel approved the plan. The attack began at dawn. 4 Panzer IIs moved in pairs, advancing through a ravine that paralleled the main road. Müller's tank led the northern element. The other pair advanced 200 meters to the south. The coordination relied on radio discipline and timing. No unnecessary chatter, no hesitation. The T-34s appeared at 0630 hours, moving in a staggered column toward the German line. Müller counted 9 tanks. The lead vehicle was larger, turret marked with a white stripe. Command tank. Becker, Müller said. Flank speed, 60 meters and stop. The Panzer II surged forward, tracks chewing through mud. The distance closed rapidly. 50 meters, 40, 30. Müller aligned the gun sight on the command tank's turret ring. The autocannon roared. Rounds sparked and penetrated. The T-34's turret jammed mid-rotation. Before the Soviets could react, the 2nd Panzer II emerged from the ravine and engaged a different T-34, targeting the engine deck. Smoke, confusion. The Soviet column slowed, commanders shouting over the radio, trying to locate the threat. Müller's tank reversed into cover, reloaded, advanced again, this time targeting a 3rd T-34 that had stopped to assess the situation. 10 seconds of fire. Turret ring compromised. Reverse. The southern pair repeated the pattern, hit and withdraw, hit and withdraw. By 0645, 3 T-34s were immobilized. The remaining tanks scattered, abandoning the road, seeking cover in the tree line. That's when the Panzer IIIs opened fire. Long-range, precision shots. 2 more T-34s destroyed outright. 1 KV-1 retreated under smoke cover. The engagement ended by 0700. 4 Panzer IIs had disrupted an entire Soviet tank column. Not a single German light tank was lost. Müller climbed out of the turret and lit a cigarette. His hands were shaking. Hoffmann sat on the hull, staring at nothing. Becker emerged from the driver's hatch and vomited into the mud. "We did it," Hoffmann said quietly. Müller nodded. They had done it, and now everyone would expect them to do it again. By November 1941, the Wespe tactic had been formally adopted by 3 light panzer battalions operating on the central sector of the Eastern Front. Training protocols were updated. Crews practiced close-range engagements against mock targets. Intelligence officers compiled lists of T-34 weak points and distributed them to every gunner. The Panzer II, once dismissed as obsolete, became a psychological weapon. Soviet tank commanders grew cautious. They began spacing their formations wider, assigning escorts to watch for flanking attacks. This reduced their effectiveness in breakthrough operations. German infantry reported that Soviet armor was slower to commit, more hesitant to exploit gaps. The mathematics of combat had shifted, not through superior firepower, but through unpredictability. Müller's crew conducted 8 more engagements using the Wespe tactic. They immobilized 11 T-34s, damaged 4 KV-1s, and destroyed 2 Su-76 assault guns. They also lost 2 Panzer IIs from other crews who mistimed their withdrawals. Müller attended both funerals. He did not speak at either service. In December, the winter weather made operations nearly impossible. The Panzer II's narrow tracks struggled in deep snow. The autocannon's recoil mechanism froze in sub-zero temperatures. Müller spent his days wrapped in a greatcoat, cleaning ice from the gun barrel, while Hoffmann and Becker huddled in the crew compartment with a kerosene heater. The war slowed. The front stabilized. On December 18th, Hauptmann Vogel summoned Müller to the command post. A Wehrmacht colonel from the Heereswaffenamt, the Army Weapons Office, had arrived to interview crews using unconventional tactics. Müller answered questions for 90 minutes, describing the engagement distances, reload times, and psychological effects. The colonel took notes in a leather-bound journal. He asked Müller if he believed the Panzer II could continue to be effective as Soviet armor improved. Müller said no. The T-34 was already being upgraded with better optics and radios. The KV-1 was too heavily armored to engage at any range. The Panzer II's time was ending. But for 6 weeks in the autumn of 1941 it had mattered. It had made a difference. The colonel thanked him and left. Müller never learned if the interview influenced any decisions. By February 1942, most Panzer IIs had been withdrawn from frontline service on the Eastern Front. They were redeployed to North Africa, where lighter armor and rapid movement were still viable. Müller's crew was reassigned to a Panzer III battalion. Becker became a driver again. Hoffmann transferred to a Panzer IV as a loader. Müller received a promotion to lieutenant and took command of a reconnaissance platoon. He never forgot the lesson of the Vesper. Size and armor did not determine victory. Ingenuity and courage did. The Panzer II had been called a toy, but in the hands of crews willing to redefine its purpose, it became something more. A weapon that should not have worked, but did. A machine that changed the rules by refusing to follow them. In the files of the 7th Panzer Division, a short entry dated November 2, 1941, reads, "Light tanks employed in close assault. Enemy armor disrupted. Tactic effective. Recommend further study." That was all. No names, no decorations. Just a quiet acknowledgement that somewhere, on a frozen road in Russia, a crew in a 9-ton tank had looked at a 26-ton monster and decided not to run.